Aloha gardeners. Um, Today I would like to talk about um, diet and disease prevention. Big flu epidemic going on over on the mainland right now. Hawaii is kind of isolated from it. We're so far in the best shape as far as cases, but they do claim it's coming here. Well, why not? Everybody comes here, right? Tourists from all over the place. So yeah, they bring us all that junk. But right now, the flu vaccine is supposedly only about 15% effective. Um, and if you listen to most of the doctors will say if you want to prevent the flu, wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands. And absolutely, um, that's a really good idea. It's also very simple. It's a good idea, period. I do it a lot over here for a variety of different reasons. But washing your hands is a great idea. They say that the flu virus will exist for up to 48 hours on a doorknob. Also, those of you who might be traveling, beware. The statistics will show that you are 119 times more likely to contract the common cold while you're on an airplane than while you're sitting out here in the backyard. And so flu, same way. The contagion factor is massive if you're traveling at the moment. I am going nowhere. I ain't even going to town. I'm staying here. You guys all stay away. um, so anyway, hand washing, that definitely, I would limit my contact with hands, doorknobs, doors, and so on, and probably airplanes too. Public transportation is definitely a concern. But here around the island, we're hearing a little different story from people. I know I'm hearing so many people talking about watch how you eat, that your diet is going to affect your ability to resist diseases. And this is valid stuff. I mean, if you're well nourished and you have good vitamins, good minerals, and so on, your immune system is probably going to be stronger than the next guy that lives on junk food and is probably short of numerous basic nutrients. And so it's an intelligent viewpoint, but here it goes even beyond because most Hawaiians do not like genetic engineering or corporate agriculture and so on. And so, the message also extends to eat non-GMO food, eat organic, eat fresh, stay away from fast food, processed food, and so on. And there's a lot of validity in this stuff because the processed foods are usually devoid of almost anything that's nutrient. If it has it, they probably added it back as artificial supplements. Whereas a truly well-grown organic apple or a tomato or a sweet potato that doesn't have chemicals laced on it, it wasn't genetically engineered to force it to grow under ridiculous situations where otherwise it couldn't have, a naturally grown piece of food that's fresh and available locally is probably a really, really good idea. I've taken that idea that people propose here about diet and health and resisting disease. I'm taking it one step further. I believe that the solution to good health is actually eating local and seasonal. There's a lot of things that you're going to avoid when you do that. I mean, McDonald's fast food or whatever, any kind of fast, kind of trashy food, it is not local or seasonal in most cases. All right, so immediately you say, well, that's not where I eat. It's, most of your processed food in the supermarkets. These things are not local and seasonal. I think it's actually really, really bad for our health if we live in New York City and we desire to eat tomatoes 12 months out of the year. This doesn't make sense. And actually, it doesn't make sense in the historic genetic evolution of the human being. A very interesting fact about the hardwiring in our brains. We are genetically wired to resist eating the same food day after day after day after day. This is out of nature. It has to do with as we were, less civilized, so we did not have the sanitation and so on, refrigeration, that if we ate the same carcass or whatever it was we were feeding on every day repeatedly, sooner or later we were probably going to poison ourselves by eating contaminated or spoiled food. And so the brain is actually hardwired to prevent this behavior. Also, traditionally, whether it be early humans or whether it be any wild animal on the planet, originally, before we set up these huge food distribution networks and transportation, and before we had canning, freezing, and all these other processing for preserving and distribution of foods, we ate what was available locally in the area where we lived 12 months out of the year. I mean, it varied. If you're in the Arctic Circle, you were an Inuit or an Eskimo or something, well, you probably ate a lot of seals, you know. Salmon ran at certain times. You ate a lot of salmon. And I know Eskimos did dry and smoke fish too, you know. And so they preserved stuff for putting it away for the winter. You know, they probably ate whales too. Whatever was available. Obviously, an Eskimo 200 years ago did not go to a salad bar, right? Okay. And as you move down from the poles, you get into Scandinavia and so on. Well, in the wintertime, folks were probably eating tremendous amounts of stored root vegetables. They were eating things that were preserved because they'd been fermented. You know, in Northern Europe, sauerkraut, for instance, a very important food. Pickles, in fact, you know, crock-cured pickles. And in fact, beer. Beer was at one time food. You know, in the United States, we get this kind of mixed up. We think, oh, beer's a drug. You know, yeah, I guess you can get high on beer. But my ancestors, which were predominantly German, Czechoslovakian people, my ancestors, we lived on beer. That was the wintertime food. It's how we stored barley. Anyway, so these seasonal eating patterns are natural. They're perfectly natural. The body is perfectly adapted to them. More so, it reinforces them, because if you try to eat the same food day after day, eventually it will become repugnant and your mind will tell you don't eat that anymore. It wants you to eat this and then eat that and then eat this and next and that. And that's exactly how it happened in nature. You know, you'd be out, you'd be gathering seeds from one plant at one time, you know, digging a root at another time, you know, maybe game came through or fish ran, you know, and that type of thing. So, you know, for 2 weeks every year you had more fish than you knew what to do with. So you dry it if you were unfortunate, lived in Scandinavia, they turned it into lutefisk. little happier in Italy, they made bacala out of the cods. But anyhow, this type of approach to our diet is actually what our body dictates. Unfortunately, today's massive corporate agriculture and industrial food processing and planetary distribution networks, they've broken all that down. They've messed it up. You know, we can eat tomatoes 12 months out of the year if we want to in Ontario. Now, obviously, what seasonal and local eating means in different environments, different latitudes on the planet, obviously different. You know, you can all say, oh, well, Bill, you live in Hawaii. You can eat bananas out of your backyard 12 months out of the year. Well, it's true. Yeah, it's true. But I didn't always live in Hawaii. And the ideas that I have behind seasonal and local eating actually started way back in the Midwest. You know, in Wisconsin, I used to grow huge crops of potatoes. We stored them. We'd grow cabbages. We stored them. We'd grow onions. We store them. Carrots, you know. I do canning. You know, we do drying and so on. It would be typical that most people who lived in the far polar tiers, whether it be north or south, in the wintertime were probably going to eat a lot more animals and a lot more fish because they were abundant. Living in northern Wisconsin during the wintertime, fresh food was on the hoof, you know. And so being a vegan, not quite so easy as you start to head towards the poles, because vegetation only grows for a very tiny period of the year. So if you are a vegan and you live in Ontario, you're probably going to have to be moving all this stuff in to support this lifestyle, not necessarily but it does make it more difficult. You know, folks who live in California where we have year-round food supplies, well, this is easy. Pick and choose whatever diet makes sense to you, you know. But you know, I've heard people, vegans particularly, announce, well, you should never eat meat. You know, well, you go tell that to an Eskimo. You know, come on, get real. It all depends on where you lived. And all of us usually pretty well adapt to whatever foods it is that we've been taking in historically for long periods of time. That's why I think different cultural groups are probably better at handling certain foods than others are. This seems to make sense to me because, you know, somebody who's eaten a certain type of a fruit or a vegetable or whatever it is for the last 10,000 years is probably going to settle easier with that than somebody who just ate it for the first time, you know. But so the idea of how diet can resist diseases, if you think about the fact that this year's flu is very serious stuff, people have been dying from it. People my age have been dying from it. But the vaccine is rather ineffective. I'm not saying don't get it, but they are saying that it's only 10 or 15%. That's not very good odds. I would say that good diet, nutrition, excellent health because of what you eat is probably as valuable as a flu vaccine because your immune system is probably 10 to 15% stronger if you eat right. And so right now I'd say diet is probably as important as hand washing and flu vaccines. 1, 2, 3. Again, I do promote this whole idea of local and seasonal as being the way to enter this space. It's how I got there, okay? I do this entirely. I mean, it's not, I do not like to suffer, and so we live in a world today where if I decide I want to eat beluga caviar, well, I'll buy it, we'll bring it in, it's imported, I'm not going to do that every day. And what you eat sometimes isn't necessarily as important as how often you eat it. I think it's probably a fine thing once a year for everybody to have a breakfast donuts or malasadas and coffee. There's nothing wrong with that. You do it once in a while. Generally, though, I would suggest that you probably have, whole grains and fruits and vegetables and things like this for your breakfast, some eggs. These are better ideas in the long run, but it's a matter of what are you doing, how often are you doing it, and where you're sourcing. If you're sourcing locally, all right, then you are running across food that is indigenous to the area where you're at. That's where the farmers markets come in important. Now, some places they shut the farmers markets down in the winter. This is unfortunate because technically these markets would have historically been providing food to people even during that period because we have to eat year-round. But you'd have been getting, in New York, instead of getting tomatoes, which you'd see in August, you'd be getting potatoes and turnips, which you'd see stored in January. But I think the best solution to how to eat seasonal and local, grow your own. Yeah, I mean, you don't have to start off in a big way. Plant a tomato plant. You start to get the idea after a while of not only how good that local food is, the homegrown food is usually quite good, but you also begin to understand the seasonality of things and how do you extend a season. You can start tomatoes under plastic. You can finish them under plastic if you want to, so the season extends longer. You can even grow lettuce and spinach and such in Minnesota in the wintertime using solar greenhouses. When I was a resident in northern Wisconsin, I grew greens year-round, just like I do here in Hawaii. Now, they didn't grow as fast, okay? But using solar greenhouses, I produced greens in the wintertime. Although, again, like I said, we did exist much more on stored food that we'd put up. Most of the fresh stuff that I'd bring in the winter was, through the ice. We'd go out and get some walleye pike up through the ice or something on that order and bring it in. Go do a little hunting, partridges or whatever it was, and so these were real treats during the middle of the snowy, frozen periods. And that's kind of how it's always been. Like I say, if you live in California and Hawaii and Florida, you can eat fresh fruit, fresh vegetables that's grown locally year-round. But even in California, where I lived around San Francisco Bay, that is a 180-degree type season. There's two halves to it. You know, to make the full circle of the year, we would have a warm and dry period where sweet corn, tomatoes, watermelons grew, okay? But then we'd have a cool, moist period in the winter where onions and garlic and lettuce and spinach and broccoli and cabbage and kale and all these other vegetables grew so well. After a while, I really got to enjoy this, the changes that came at us. You know, when I lived in the Midwest, we used to have to process and store stuff. I'd have tomatoes in jars and all that. And we'd use our summer bounty all winter long by storing it, but I had gotten in the habit of freezing, canning, drying, you know, and I still do this. Here in Hawaii, I do quite a bit of drying of things. So it was in California's season where things were distinctly different from one side of the year to the other, that I stopped putting things in jars and stopped storing so much food. I said, what was the point of all that anyway? I don't need to eat tomatoes in the middle of January when I have broccoli. And so I stopped the storing and processing in that climate and began feeding on whatever was coming out of the orchard, whatever was coming out of the gardens. You know, during the middle of summer and into fall, we'd have apples, because I love apples and so many different kinds. You know, well, that had moved from the apples to the persimmons as we swept into deep fall. Well, from the persimmons, it would then start to sweep into the citrus during the winter and the avocados. You know, and so it would go from one thing to another, to another, to another, to another, and I just really began to enjoy going after whatever it was that was available at that time and turning it into whatever we were going to eat on the table. Now, I did make an effort to try to keep the production balanced, you know, so I would be planting things year-round and thinking about what likes the cool weather and what do I like to eat, what likes the warm weather and what's our favorite food and so on. You know, in the orchards I would try to organize the plants that were fruiting so that one thing would come after another, after another, after another, and they keep going around because, I mean, even here in Hawaii, it is seasonal. I mean, even if you live at the shore, where it's really warm and you're in your bathing suit all year, we still have seasons. The joke here in Hawaii is that, yeah, the seasons are, it's mango season, it's lychee season, it's guava season, it's lilikoi season, okay? And, you know, this goes around the calendar depending on what fruit comes in, because the fruit trees here, for instance, do not fruit year-round. In fact, yes, you can grow tomatoes year-round here, but it ain't that easy. It's much easier for me that I plant the tomatoes during the summertime more so, and then I grow a lot of cabbages and kale and things like this, broccoli, kohlrabi during the wintertime, because we're a little bit up the mountain. We chose this intentionally. I do like the small variation we get. They're about 10 degrees different from summer to winter. And that's just enough that, you know, peppers thrive in July and broccoli thrives in February. And so we see seasons here too. Oh, it's much easier to accommodate the food because there's no snow on the ground here, no freezing, you know, nothing really stops production in this environment. Yeah, some things, you know, like the banana, well, it's around all the time, you know, but yeah, so it's the idea of how your diet will affect your ability to resist disease. And at this point, I am stating without absolute proof, but I believe that good diet and flu vaccine this year are at least equal as far as, you know, preventing getting sick. And if you do turn yourself towards local food and seasonal eating patterns, you're going to find yourself falling into a place where your food is going to be much higher quality. And I think you'll enjoy it more. I sure do, man. I get bored eating the same thing all the time. You know, it's my brain, it's wired that way. My partner, Ellen, even worse, man. You know, I give her the same thing 2 days in a row. She goes, you know. Some people are more so. On the other hand, they claim Donald Trump eats like, I don't know, 2 Big Macs a day, every day of the year. Well, you know, we all know there's something wrong in here. I don't care whether his cognitive test indicated he could tell the difference between a lion and a rhinoceros. So, anyway, rain's back. I'm happy. My crops are getting watered finally. It's a flu epidemic. Wash your hands. I suggest eating right. I suggest growing your own food as much as possible, and otherwise eating what is available locally at the time of the year. You'll like it. You'll like it. It's really fun. And you know, consider most of the boxes and cans and all that stuff is like just basically off limits. You know, anything that comes from McDonald's in a little cardboard carton that they throw in the ditch in front of my place here, and I got to clean up the mess. That's not food. You know, and you're not going to be healthy eating it anyway.
I can't speak for everyone, but I do think that this here broccoli and that kohlrabi over there, that looks a lot tastier than the Big Mac. Some fresh, homegrown endive. Oh yeah, you betcha. That's food. Pears from Chile or Valencia oranges right off the tree in the backyard. That's a no-brainer for me. I don't have to get in the car and go to the store to get the oranges.